In the high-stakes game of global brinkmanship, strategy isn't about the weapon itself. It's about the exact moment that weapon becomes most vulnerable to a calculated strike. Russia's Oreshnik was marketed as an unstoppable hypersonic ghost, a shadow in the sky that no modern air defense system could ever hope to touch. Yet, the most sophisticated missile in the world remains a mere collection of metal and chemicals until the moment it finally leaves the launch rail. Ukraine didn't try to solve the impossible mathematical equation of intercepting a Mach 10 missile while it was screaming through the upper atmosphere at night. Instead, they chose to solve the logistics of a stationary target, proving that the ground is the ultimate equalizer in the theater of modern warfare. The battlefield for this operation wasn't the stratosphere. It was a high-security warehouse floor tucked away in the quiet, forested countryside of Belarus. Moscow's fatal mistake was believing that heavy fortification equals invincibility, forgetting that a singular point of failure can bring down even the mightiest military asset. By consolidating their elite Oreshnik battery into a single forward-deployed site, they created a target-rich environment that was far too tempting for Ukraine to ignore. Ukrainian intelligence watched the buildup with a level of clinical patience, refusing to strike when the first few units arrived or when the site was half-manned. They waited specifically for the Goldilocks Zone of destruction, the precise window where every single asset was fueled, pressurized, and sitting directly in the crosshairs. Satellite sensors began picking up massive heat signatures leaking from underground bunkers, suggesting that heavy machinery and electrical grids were working at their maximum capacity. This thermal bleed acted as a digital beacon, revealing that beneath the peaceful Belarusian soil, a billion-dollar strategic reserve was being brought to life for combat. Reactivated rail lines, silent since the darkest days of the Cold War, began feeding the beast as heavy convoys moved like clockwork under the cover of darkness. Every 50-ton vehicle that entered those high-security gates added more potential energy to the eventual fireball that would soon light up the entire Eastern European horizon. Communication traffic around the base surged by a staggering 900%, creating a digital scream in the middle of a silent forest that analysts couldn't possibly miss. Russia was placing its most prized deterrent on the doorstep of Europe, a tool of psychological dominance intended to make NATO blink in the face of aggression. Each Oreshnik launcher represented roughly $400 million in precision engineering, making the entire battery worth more than the annual defense budget of many small nations. But the system possessed a hidden, fatal flaw that had nothing to do with its speed or its stealth: the extreme volatility of its fuel. Solid propellant generates heat equivalent to a small star during launch, and once the pressurization process starts, these launchers essentially become massive, static bombs. Moving a pressurized Oreshnik is a logistical nightmare that takes hours, meaning that once the Russians broke the seal on assembly, they were irrevocably committed. The Ukrainian High Command watched as 10 launchers were packed into a tiny 600-meter radius, creating a concentration of force that was both impressive and incredibly dangerous. Instead of launching a massive fleet, Ukraine prepared a surgical ghost package that cost less than $8 million, a mere rounding error compared to their target. 2 F-16s and a handful of low-cost drones were all that was required to dismantle a strategic wing of the Russian military in a single night. The plan didn't rely on brute force. It relied on overwhelming the enemy's senses and exploiting the predictable programming of modern, high-tier air defense systems. The first phase of the attack was a digital ghost story, using clever decoys to mimic the signatures of high-altitude bombers and lure out the defenders. Russian S-400 systems took the bait immediately, firing multi-million-dollar interceptors at nothing but electronic signatures and thin air, while the real threat approached undetected. While the S-400s were stuck in a 40-minute reload cycle, the sky was effectively opened for the next phase of this masterfully coordinated asymmetric assault. Then came the mosquito swarm, a wave of small drones skimming the treetops and flying well below the radar's floor to create total chaos on the ground. These drones forced the short-range Pantsir systems into a frantic high-speed engagement, firing thousands of rounds per minute at targets that cost less than the ammunition. By pushing the base's processors to 95% capacity, Ukraine effectively blinded the site with a flood of data, ensuring the operators couldn't see the real killers. With the defenders looking left, 4 JASSM-ER missiles were released from a safe distance, ignoring electronic warfare as they used internal maps to find their targets. These missiles weren't aiming for the thickest walls. They were programmed with surgical precision to hit the vents and the specific structural weak points of the bunkers. When the warheads detonated inside the facilities, the physics of the strike became devastatingly simple as the explosions ignited the volatile solid fuel of the Oreshniks. This created a self-sustaining chemical fire that reached 5,000 degrees Celsius, causing the bunkers to undergo a total structural collapse from the inside out in seconds. Steel doors were blown off their hinges like children's toys, and the earth shook with the force of a localized earthquake as the missiles cooked off. In a matter of heartbeats, 14 months of complex manufacturing evaporated, and the rare materials required to build such weapons were lost forever in the blaze. 2 launchers tried to flee the inferno, but were quickly caught by secondary drones, leaving the unstoppable weapon nothing more than a field of charred scrap. Russia's strategic signal had been intercepted by reality, and the credibility of the Oreshnik vanished before the weapon ever saw a single minute of combat flight. This wasn't just a victory of superior technology, but a victory of the mind that proved the concentration of force is always a double-edged sword. The Ukrainian military demonstrated that patience is a kinetic weapon, allowing the enemy to finish the hard work of setting their own elaborate and expensive trap. The result was a $4 billion loss achieved with a fraction of the effort, proving that no hypersonic speed can outrun a strike on a parked truck. The Oreshnik's first mission was also its last, as the forward deployment meant to threaten Europe ended in the mud of a Belarusian scrapyard instead. Modern wars are won in the gaps between the enemy's assumptions, and Russia assumed their technology was simply too fast for anyone to ever catch. Ukraine realized that the weapon was too heavy to move once fueled, and that single realization changed the entire balance of power in a single evening. The site now remains a cratered, smoking reminder of the dangers of hubris and the limitations of relying purely on high-tech solutions for strategic dominance. Surveillance footage from the base showed the sheer panic of the crews who realized far too late that their own weapons had become their executioners in waiting. There is no defense against a fire that starts from within your own weapon, and the Oreshnik's solid fuel proved to be its own worst enemy. The chain reaction was the carefully planned outcome of Ukrainian engineers who sought to use the enemy's own massive energy reserves against them for maximum effect. It was the ultimate soft kill on a hard target, and global intelligence circles are still reeling from the incredible efficiency and low cost of the strike. This operation now serves as a textbook example of how to dismantle a strategic threat without having to risk a single pilot over hostile enemy soil. No massive missile barrages were needed to saturate the zone, just a few well-placed hits on a system that had effectively locked itself in for launch. The Oreshnik was revealed to be a paper tiger that burned very real fuel, shifting the perspective of military analysts worldwide on the value of hypersonic weapons. The cost-to-kill ratio of this mission is likely the highest in modern history, deleting an entire strategic wing for the price of a luxury apartment.
The psychological blow to Moscow is even more significant than the financial one, as their invincible deterrent was dismantled by gasoline-powered drones and aging F-16 fighter jets. The Belarusian site is now a graveyard for high-tech ambitions, and while silence has returned to the region, the strategic impact of the strike remains felt. Future historians will study this as the moment the hypersonic myth died, proving that it wasn't about the missile's flight, but about the moment of its birth. Ukraine cut the umbilical cord at the exact moment of maximum pain, demonstrating a level of precision in timing that cannot be overstated by any analyst. A minute earlier, and the fuel wouldn't have been pressurized. A minute later, and the missiles might have already been moving toward their targets in Europe. Perfection in warfare is a rare thing to witness, but this operation was as close to a perfect execution as any modern military has ever achieved. The data gathered from the heat signatures and the air defense response will fuel Western intelligence for years, providing a roadmap for future engagements with similar systems. We now know the thermal limits of these secret installations and exactly how Russian air defense handles multi-layered saturation when pushed to the absolute breaking point. Most importantly, the world now knows that the Oreshnik can be stopped with a plan that prioritizes intelligence, timing, and the exploitation of logistical vulnerabilities over brute force. The fire lasted for hours, lighting up the night sky for miles around, yet local residents reported hearing no planes, a hallmark of a truly surgical strike. The debris field tells a story of total failure, as not a single command vehicle or support unit survived the massive secondary blasts from the fuel. The personnel involved were some of Russia's most highly trained specialists, and replacing them will take just as long as manufacturing the complex missiles they once operated. This was a decapitation strike against a specific strategic capability, turning the Oreshnik from a terrifying asset into a liability that haunts every future deployment. Strategic deterrence relies entirely on the enemy being afraid of your weapon, but after this night, the fear has shifted back to the owner of the weapon. Ukraine has rewritten the rules of engagement for unstoppable systems, proving once again that every weapon has a home, and every home has a vulnerable door. If you can find that door and strike it at the right time, you can win the war regardless of how fast the enemy's missiles claim to be. The $4 billion Bonfire was the most expensive lesson Russia has learned in this conflict, a masterclass in using the small to defeat the large. As the smoke clears, the strategic map of Europe looks very different, with the forward reach of the Russian military effectively shortened by a single night's work. Security through secrecy failed when faced with persistent, high-resolution surveillance and the clinical application of asymmetric warfare tactics by a motivated and clever defending force. The Oreshnik era may have ended before it truly began, proving that in the end, timing is everything, and Ukraine's clock was perfectly synced for victory. This operation stands as a permanent testament to the power of intelligence-led warfare, showing that a well-timed strike can delete a threat more effectively than any defense. If you enjoyed this breakdown of tactical precision and the death of a hypersonic myth, hit the subscribe button to stay updated on the strategies changing our world. We dive deep into the hidden mechanics of modern conflict, so let us know in the comments whether the clever decoys or the internal physics impressed you most. Would you like me to analyze the specific electronic warfare signatures used to spoof the S-400 systems during the opening phase of this operation?